Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Ben.
So, when we were kids growing up in the mid to late 90s, video games cost money, right?
I remember some of that.
But nowadays, the prevailing model is freemium, which is, no cost up front, but there are typically other things in the game that'll cost you.
Yeah, yeah.
So, my first question is to you, free versus paid, does that affect your perception of quality of how good the game will be?
That's an interesting question. Um, I remember when Genshin Impact was making that just blast over, like you were hearing about the game everywhere, and it looked like a cool game, and I downloaded it. I haven't even opened it. I think it was a year and a half ago. I'm not a super great gamer. Like I'm pretty proud of how far I've gotten in Celeste, but they don't make that game impossible. They just make it difficult. And
Right.
and the game teaches you how to play it as you go. So like I enjoy a challenge as long as it's one I can rise to.
That's a paid game, right?
Yeah.
So they're incentivized, at least on some level, to make the game enjoyable and to give you a workable path through it.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas a lot of the freemium games that come out, they're designed more to keep you in the game and keep you grinding. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's kind of a perverse incentive. They're not so much designing games as they are trying to like design behavior, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Um After we graduated college, Mafia Wars was big on Facebook. I was like drifting into that depressed state where you don't really know what to try next. You want a job, but that wasn't panning out. But Mafia Wars was calling for a lot of my attention, and
Yep.
that was at least something in my life I could level up in.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's these low hanging dopaminergic
yes,
rewards.
yes.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get ahead of your questions, but
No, you're
especially
good.
since I work as a counselor now, that is the thing. I think that the fact that the fact that it does anything for you in terms of dopamine, and the fact that it's 100% available, like when do you even really have downtime? So anyways, to kind of bring it back, I was playing Mafia Wars. I remember setting my sleep schedule around it. Like I'm remembering getting up at like 3 or 4 in the morning just to log on and use my points. And like for a while that was my life. I remember, I think you were into this more than I was, like the tycoon style games when we were kids.
Yes.
So like there was one where you basically can build a functioning city. Like it starts taking you through the basics. You have to develop this to this point before you can build this type of building. And so I'm not going to deny that's compelling because, well, heck, even when I was a warehouse janitor, it was interesting to me to have that experience of being able to observe, okay, this is the whole process this warehouse goes through from beginning of an order to shipping that order. It was
Sure.
interesting to me to have the vantage point to just be able to kind of sweep around all day and look sweep around this sweep
Right.
around the warehouse all day. Oh wow. Sounds like a different profession.
It was just
um
very popular in the warehouse.
I was known, we'll just say that.
Right.
It was an interesting part of my job to be able to have an up close look at how all of those parts interrelated. And so I think that's a compelling thing to have in a game. But
Hmm.
after a little while, I realized, wow, this is doing to me what Candy Crush did to me. It is becoming what I do whenever I have a spare moment to work on it. It was habit forming in a way that made me think I was losing an opportunity whenever I was not spending time on the game.
Sometimes games, they have tons and tons of players, but there's a tiny fraction of people who are where they get their revenue. And sometimes they're called whales because they spend ungodly amounts of money on these games. Do you think that's just normal market action, or do you think that that rises to the level of exploitation?
Oh, geez. It's hard because you asked an ethics question. if the people are telling you what they want and you're giving it to them, you could make the case that you're serving the people's interest. Just the same as it's within people's rights to go vacationing in Vegas to hit the slot machines.
Yep.
But it's hard because if you're a kid, you're probably asking your parents permission to use their card to pay for whatever you're buying on a freemium game, but probably not in all cases.
Yeah, and you don't have the same understanding that what you're doing is, filling a similar urge that something like gambling fills. You're not as a child.
Yeah.
And even some adults, I think, don't realize what they're doing when they're engaging with this type of media.
Sure. And I was going to say it doesn't hit the same, but no, that's actually the fact. It does hit the same, but you just don't necessarily recognize it as the same thing.
Right. Some games, they limit the amount of play by, you've run out of lives or you've failed the level in Candy Crush too many times, and then they have a timed cooldown, or they let you purchase your way back in. Is that any different in your mind to, what arcades did in the 80s? Where you could just put in another quarter? Or does it change it now that they can adapt the game to kind of maximize that profit?
It's funny because I didn't even think about that. Yeah, like that's kind of the same phenomenon, isn't it? At least in a way, like it's packaged different, but it is kind of the same thing.
Do you see an ethical difference between developers offering purchases that affect gameplay versus things that are just cosmetic?
In general terms, it just kind of seems like a dick move to to make it so that the players who pay on a free to play game are gonna just plain have the upper hand.
So what do you think about, we mentioned games that will allow you to buy your way out of cooldowns. What do you think about games that will let you watch an advertisement to move on?
I mean, it's an option.
Yeah.
It's part of our landscape now, which it seems like those advertisements that you can do instead of paying are the same numbers game that direct mailers used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
And just as irritating. Which I guess we should be thankful to these people who are addicted to these games and apps, because
they're standing in the gap for the rest of us.
You're slapping yourself in the face with ads, so we don't have to be.
Yes.
We salute you.
Yes.
So regular, predictable rewards might give you a little dopamine spike, but when you have randomized rewards and you hit on the good one, that gets you a big dopamine spike.
Which is the same as lottery, and for younger people, it was the same as bubblegum machines.
So do you think that adds an extra ethical wrinkle when people are selling these upgrades through games to add a random element to it?
So like when I think of making certain things more rare and making it sort of luck of the draw in games, to me that's not much different from in the 90s when a bunch of us were like buying packs of trading cards. Pokemon's a good example. It's like, that you're going to end up having 10 of the same card, but sometimes you're going to get a foil covered Squirtle or something like that, right? It makes it special. It does make it part of the experience.
This might be a good question to kind of take things away from the realm of ethics and more into the realm of what would personally concern you. If you had a child, would you have concerns just letting them run free with the freemium games that interested them?
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. That's a good question. That's a really good question. The way that I sucker punch my clients now that I work in counseling, this is bad to say it that way, but like the way
you physically beat your clients.
Yeah, when I physically, when I'm a virtual therapist, so there's not even the option. But it's the problems that people will go through. It's easy for yourself to be the last person you'll have compassion for, and that sucks. But it just kind of is that way. So the way that I sort of circumnavigate that is once my clients have developed enough rapport and trust with me that they've kind of shared some of what is kind of keeping them down, keeping them feeling stuck, I will ask them to look at their problem as if it were happening to their own child, and see, would you like, look, does any protective instinct rise up within you if you think about this happening to your own 9-year-old and not to you? But that is to say that really does make it a lot more real. I'm less inclined to let my own kids do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And not just because of the immediate well-being, but because of the, potential developmental issues.
And since we didn't say it outright, you're in your mid-20s by the time your brain is finished developing. If you're practicing going to some kind of freemium game and that's maybe your biggest buzz in life, then you're kind of teaching yourself to live that way.